Hello, and welcome to the second session of the 2022 Community Justice Forum. I am Donna Michelle St. Bernard, and I'm just here to briefly greet you and shortly pass over to an engrossing conversation about sustainability in performance design. I am personally coming at you from out where I'm at, floating in orange space, but also in real life, I'm on the edge of the dish with one spoon territory. The land where I'm on is subject to the dish with one spoon wampum belt covenant and part of the Between Lakes Purchase. It is the traditional territories of the Wendat, Erie, Neutral, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. But at New Harlem, we're well aware, as by now I think we all are, that the work that we do digitally extends beyond the physical spaces that we occupy. And the impact of that work is not just conceptual and imaginary, but also involves pipes in a series of tubes. So yeah, we can't make a move without having an impact, which doesn't mean we shouldn't move. It just means we should think. Am I right, y'all? I would love to hand over to this evening's host, Yvette Nolan. And I'm going to sit back and just enjoy this conversation. And I also want to thank Marcy Adolf for her fantastic interpretation tonight. Late skates.
Chimigwach DM Ani Kwekwe Yvette Nadishnikas, Gitaganzi B Nondanjaba. My name's Yvette Nolan. My people are from Kitaganzi B, Algonquin First Nation in Quebec, but I usually live, and I realized I was about to say that I was beaming in from Saskatoon, Treaty 6 territory, but actually I flew today, and I'm actually in Tiohtià:ke in Montreal, which is Kanyen'kehá:ka territory, and I don't think my spirit is quite caught up to my body yet. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. This is one of the sort of basic tenets of New Harlem's work, and I'm so grateful to have these guests joining us. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, which is way better than me introducing them. So if, we talked a little bit about this beforehand. If you can introduce yourself, who you are, whatever that means to you, where you are, whatever that means to you, and what you do, whatever that means to you. So I'll throw to Jensine.
Sure. Thank you very much. My name is Jensine Emeline. I use she and they pronouns. I am beaming in from Treaty 6 territory from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, where I was born and raised and still live today. My family comes from Treaty 5 territory. We're from Nepal, Manitoba, and we hail from Norway as well. So I've got a lot of different cultural things that I'm working through family-wise, which is really great. In Saskatoon here, I have a degree from the U of S in theater design. I work as both a costume designer and a set designer, depending on the show, as well as a stage manager. I'm the projects and operations manager for 25th Street Theatre, who runs the Saskatoon Fringe Festival as well. And I do a little bit of graphic design and this, that, and the other. I am a beadwork artist. I do clay artistry. I paint. I do basically everything except music. So if you want music, don't come to me. But I can do just about everything else. So that's me.
My turn. I'll go.
Thanks. Yeah.
Working backwards from that, that's oftentimes the way that I describe my performance work too, is that I am not a performer. If you need many other things done to varying degrees of effectiveness, like some are better than others, but the performance one is not it. I'm Ian Garrett, he, him. I'm coming in today and I'm typically at this point in my life based in Pecoranto. Also dish with one spoon, wampum belt covenant area, traditional home of Haudenosaunee here on Wendat, Métis, Mississaugas. Although I've been here for about 10 years, I originally come from Tongva and Chumash land, temporarily known as Los Angeles, and am pleased to still get to work up and down the California coast, including on a lot of work recently on a Lonely Land, which is where, when we're talking about these Zoom tubes, they like to they keep their money in their corporate offices, and come from, on my mom's side, Dutch Jews who came and are also in Dish with a Spoon area, but Lenni Lenape territory, and my dad's side is OG settlers, literal colonists that came came to the Carolina, what is now the Carolinas, in Saponi, Okanichi, and Catawba territories as well. I teach, and what brought me originally to Tekaronto is York University. So I teach ecological design for performance at York. I direct an organization that has had a few different incarnations called the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts, that works on sustainable practice in the arts. It's a very descriptive name. And work as a freelance designer and artist, a lot of stuff in the digital realm through a collective called Toaster Lab. And parent to 2 small children who you might hear in the background at some point this evening.
Okay, it's not actually a panel unless we see an animal and children. Usually it's a cat, but I know Jensine has a dog, so I'm fine to switch out the dog for the cat. Chimigwet, you guys. I read a book on the plane. I read Emily St. John Mandel's book, Sea of Tranquility, and it was kind of hopeful in a way because she has all these timelines moving forward like 400 years from here, which is, to me, incredibly hopeful, because I just don't believe that we can pull back from the brink. And of course, Emily St. John Mandel's other book, and recently made into a series, is Station 11, which is post, not this pandemic, but one she imagined. And it's a traveling, so it speaks to my heart because it's a group of players after a pandemic who travel around doing theater. But one of the picture I shared with these panelists before we started was one of like the player wearing a costume that's made out of reclaimed gloves, golf gloves. And it's a great sort of visual. And this is like also where I live. Like, I just don't, I wrote a play called The Unplugging that is also post-apocalyptic, because I need to clear the world of people in order to find a way forward. So I know I'm not the best. I'm going to be the pessimist on this panel, but so I'll ask you two, because you are, I think, more optimistic than I am, because you're actually practically involved in thinking about sustainability initiatives in theater, which is kind of amazing to me. So I guess this is like a wide open thing. And I really do want this to be more of a conversation than and now Ian talks and now Jensine talks, but we can start by talking about how or if your practice has changed or is changing in response to the world. In response, in this last couple of years, we've had a couple of pandemics, and now we're in the fossil fuel disappearance, and what does that mean to us who are trying to make theater? So, Jensine, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can jump in first. Actually, I was thinking about it today, so I'm glad we started with this kind of conversation. Yes, I think my practice has changed. To what degree, I don't know, because my career has also kind of changed. I do a lot less design work than I used to do, because I'm now in an administrative position. But now in an administrative position, I'm looking at things a little differently too. So it's helped in its own way. The major changes are, like you said, Yvette, like gas prices going up, lumber prices going up. There's a paper shortage. So something I'm dealing with as an admin now is like, there's not enough paper to print programs. Do we even need printed programs? There's not enough paper to print posters. Do we even need posters? And all those conversations that are starting because of both price and availability. And that's just on the that's trees on its own, trees and price and lumber. Like that's one of 5,000 things that are swirling in the brains of us all right now. It's also shifted. I mean, socially, we're doing a lot more EDI training, a lot more consciousness, especially in my design work, of like making sure I'm checking boxes that I think I was checking before, but that I wasn't consciously checking. Being really more attentive to the people that I am working with, whether that's physically or emotionally or anything like that. And that's not just actors, that goes into my staff and the people that I'm around on a day-to-day basis. It's also changed in post-pandemic, looking at myself and burnout and my own limits and what I know that I can do. Like I said, I can do everything except music, but that doesn't mean I should. So in knowing when to say no, like that's changed in that way too, which is sustainability as a person. I will be unsustainable and not keep doing this if I was going on the trajectory I was going on before the pandemic, or the first of the pandemics anyway. So yes, the short answer, absolutely yes. Long answer in many ways, and many ways I'm sure that I haven't even thought of. But I don't know. We've been talking now, and actually Carla Oros, a mentor of mine, had shared a bunch of resources of yours with me for a different panel. And so this is like part 2 to that panel for me. And even how much I've been noticing since that first panel to now, and how things have changed.
Yeah.
I think they change every day.
I do feel like I feel like change has been accelerating. So if there is like Yvette, I 100% feel you, because I wasn't like, my reading of late has not been the rosiest outlook. Like I'm in the middle of Ministry for the Future, Kim Stanley Robinson's, which is like, I'm halfway through. Maybe it gets better, but currently it's about the futility of trying to do change in the very near future. And it's like, I just, yes, I'm like everything. There's 2 books that have nothing to do with climate change that I just read but both involve like the end of the habitable planet. So they're in some ways are, and then the parable duology. Like it's been a sequence of post-apocalyptic things aren't turning out great, at least for a while. At least they tend to end on a rosier note. But I think that like to think about it, to take the challenge of trying to think of being identified as somebody who thinks, hopefully, I feel like things have been accelerating. There was like pre the first wave of COVID, so 2019. I was talking to the head of an organization in the UK called Julie's Bicycle, Alison Tegel. We were at a thing that the NAC had put together in Banff about climate and theater change.
Sorry, Ian, can I ask you the name of the organization?
Julie's Bicycle.
Thank you.
Yes. And we were discussing that because we had been working sort of in this realm for a long time, that we had both noticed, and we're like heartened to hear that we had both noticed this, that there was so much going on that we couldn't keep the activity in our heads anymore. There used to be a point at which you could be like, oh, you're looking for this, go talk to this person. Like you didn't need an address book. I was gonna say Rolodex, but no one needs a Rolodex anymore. But you didn't need a Rolodex to keep track of everyone, and now that you do, so that's been really exciting. I think that in my own practice, I've also sort of become identified as like, if you're looking for a guy who's going to like do the special problem of thinking through sustainable systems, you call it. So there's like a bias in also like who even talks to me about projects too, of people who are already interested in it, because it's been sort of part and parcel of my own practice, especially as a designer, for a while now, and that I don't know who doesn't talk to me. There's the unknown unknowns out there that I don't, and I find myself sort of on the periphery of a lot of the theater field at times. Yeah. So Yes. How has it changed? How has it changed what it did? I originally started as an architect, and I was training when the LEED certification scheme was being launched, and so like you couldn't be an architect without knowing it, and then got pulled over to theater design, and within like didn't think about it for a while, and remember being in tech in a show that I was lighting, and starting to do napkin calculations about solar power. I was like, how would we do this with renewables? And then I was like, why aren't we doing this? And then it's just sort of there's been a gap, and I've sought to try and fill it.
That's great. And of course, Ian, you and I worked kind of with each other early. To me, it seems early. It seems like a long time ago that you were starting this work at York. And that was From Thine Eyes, right? Like talking about actually trying to think about sustainable theater work. And it's just, I just feel like we should be further along now than we are. Like I'm just in the last couple of weeks managed to connect one theater with another theater in Saskatoon to retrieve a set that has been sitting in storage for several years. That's all wood, right? Like it's a bunch of lumber. And it was like, if someone said, well, it has to go to the dump, we're not going to do that show again. And I was like, okay, wait, shouldn't we be trying to save that? And so we made the connections, but it just feels like those are such baby steps. Like,
well, it's such hard work to even do. Our systems are so built to be biased against us trying to save anything. Like I remember talking to a production manager, and they're like, I can pay union wages to get people to build a set, and I can pay the same wages to get them to take it apart, or they can just toss it. And it was like that. It was like extremely disheartening. But there's like all this material that's going like that is that temporary nature combined with the like limited resources and like material, human, financial resources that we're dealing with, that for some reason, well, for all of those reasons, we've like come to this perception that what we're doing is we've confused the temporality of theater with the ephemerality of the materials, and those things are not necessarily the same.
Yeah.
As a designer too, I've started thinking on that there's hesitation now too, I find, in using pre-used sets, not from a safety standpoint, but from a budgetary standpoint. I've seen this happen a couple times in the last few months. If I borrow your set and don't pay for it, then my budget looks really good. And next year it'll be less because I didn't spend that money. And then the year after it'll be less. And now there's designers out there that are fearing like, I have to spend the money or else next year there won't be any money. And maybe next year I don't get to borrow a set or a costume or whatever. And there won't be any money because they think I did so good this year. That's an interesting and weird one that's happened in between pre-panel and this panel.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
Oh God, that is so disheartening.
Isn't that weird?
But it's like in every way, this is all about capitalism, right? Like I am actually physically sick when I think about the number of sets, the number of trees that have just been taken out to the bin and thrown out over the, like my little career, right? The number of, like, it just kills me. Stuff that I'm like, oh, I wish I had that now. But also, if your designers are like, they'll think that I don't need the money for the budget. Like, can't we have conversations about this? So that we're not making decisions based on like, how do we, how do we change that?
So one of the hopeful, that's the word I'm looking for, hopeful things within Ministry of the Future that was talked about is that they're talking about like the financial balance and definitely the implications of capitalism. But one of the things that's that is said, that I've noticed has been said repeatedly, is that like, well, first it's just like a false it's a false calculation, because they like value the economic value of civilization, like existing, is infinite. So whatever it would take to, like, whatever we spend on it, if that's the way that we want to couch it, is is ultimately meaningless, because like it is infinitely valuable to like carry on. And that's, I also think that the position that I typically take is that the arts, and especially theater, should be at the center of society, because like a lot of the research that has happened in the area is like, even with like the disposable nature of things, like we don't use that much stuff. And actually, when we bring people together, that actually like has trended towards environmentally positive impacts. It's also good for local economies, like to differentiate that from capitalism, but it's good for like exchange and bringing people together and helping like small businesses and things like that. It's also great for like, and documented around social cohesion and individual and community identity building, like, and those are all the things that we should be going for. So why aren't, like, if we want a sustainable, like, I don't know who's listening to me, but like, pushing for people to like put the arts at the center of society, so that we can have these conversations, and we like, because that's what ultimately why it exists to begin with. Hopefully, that's more positive.
Yeah, that's more positive.
Yeah.
I wrote a play for climate change theater action.
Mm-hmm.
Called Breathing Space. And it, when I was asked to write something about it. And for me right now, as an Indigenous artist on this land, there's really only two subjects, and one is climate and one is race relations, or how we live together here. Those are the two. So I am pulled in those directions in terms of the work that I'm doing. So when Chantal asked me to write a play for CCTA, I went back to a conversation I had, ironically, here in Montreal. I was walking down the street with a colleague, and this was like, decades ago now, the conversation, not the play. And I said, I don't think we should be allowed to make anything new.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should have to, everything, we have everything. We have to just like pick up and reclaim and repurpose, and like no more new things. And she laughed at me, she poo-pooed me, and she made the counter argument, but it didn't matter. Like a decade later or whatever, that thing, when I was, casting about for a play to write about, I wrote Breathing Space, in which what people do is go out and find the things to repurpose and reuse. So I've been living in that place for a long time, which is why I'm always surprised that we're not. And the impact that we have, like, and it's kind of getting worse. Okay, I have to have a little rant about, this is a personal pet peeve of mine in theater, is like, we articulate our values in terms of, equity and inclusion and justice. And then our people go out to the dollar store and spend a lot of money buying really cheap things that are made far away and shipped across the ocean, cheap plastic things made in another place. We do it. We all do it. Like it actually feels like I'm being flayed every time the stage manager shows up with a bag full of dollar store stuff, because not just because of but I can't help but track back to whoever made that cheap thing in whatever factory, and how old they were and what they were being paid. Like, there's no way for me to get away from that. Okay, someone's got to say something positive or something, because I'm just going down
sorry,
the rabbit
I only have
hole.
like a few more examples of those sort of like realities that like become invisible to us around power and real estate. But I can save those for later if we want to go in the positive direction.
No. Let's do it now.
Oh, okay, let's pile on. So it's like there's that like material for bringing in like inexpensive materials because we're trying to maximize our impact, and so we're like, and those systems are really made visible for like the cheap things that are happening. But it also happens, like Quebec has extremely clean power, right? Which is great, and so like I've been we being the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts and partners have been since April like had launched the Creative Green Tools, a set of like arts focused like environmental impact assessment tools, part of a larger suite of doing things, not the only thing to do, and trying to work with councils to get them out there. And in part of that discussion, and part of they're adapted from a program made by our partners at Choice Bicycle in the UK. They've done a lot of great work for reducing like emissions there, but they have a very homogenous like landscape, like where they're being used, right? The distances are much closer together, power generation similar. So when they were adapting, like one of the things that we're looking at is, so the way that you think about power and emissions is grams of carbon dioxide equivalent, so multiple greenhouse gases, but we reduce it down to carbon dioxide to be able to have a common unit per kilowatt hour generated. And the global average for that is about 400 grams of CO2 CO2 equivalents per kilowatt hour, or roughly that. So, but like in Canada, we have extremes. So Alberta is actually relatively high. It's 600 grams. Quebec is less than 2, like no more zeros there, just 2. But, and there's a great like podcast documentary, like sub-series. It's part of a put up by New Hampshire Public Radio. They have Inside Out. They had a line, I think it's like 6 episodes of Power Lines, talking about like bringing Quebec power into New England because it's clean. And it's clean because it's hydroelectric, and that was accomplished by flooding Innu land.
That's right.
Like that is, you just like obliterated ancestral like trap lines. And so now Quebec has extremely clean powers, and like it's a hard conversation to have. Or on the real estate side of things, like art space artists are like will take advantage of the available affordable space. Oftentimes, in a lot of our cities, that is areas that are being revitalized, and a lot of that is due to, well, in the US and other places with other discriminatory housing policies, redlining, which also turns them into giant heat sinks where like the investment in like green space hasn't been there. So you have these places that are like have a demonstrable impact on increasing temperatures around the globe because of the paved over area, and they've been underfunded, and now this is where like an industrial revitalization process is happening, and it happens quite a bit, which is also why you end up with a lot of theaters in some places that are not, as public, like as nonprofits, so they have a public good of not reflecting the neighborhood that they're in because
right.
they're coming in because there's space.
Right. Yeah, the
Somebody
Florida.
say something positive.
Yeah, go ahead, Jensine. Bring us up.
I don't know. My experience is quite limited. My career is as old as my boss's youngest daughter. When I started doing theater, Josie was just born. So I've been doing theater for a career for 6 years. So I don't have extensive experience, but it has been good. The perk, I think, and I consider it a perk. It can be a curse sometimes too. Being in Saskatoon and area and doing theater in Saskatoon and areas, we are a relatively small community, and we have that luxury of being a relatively small community. There are only a handful of what I will call major theaters in town, theaters with a home. The one that I work at does not fall in that category. Like we were talking about realtor space, we have a storefront in a mall that was dying, so we live in the mall right now. Not that that's a bad thing. That's not the point. The point is that we have a luxury on occasion of having a small theater community. And so a lot of my experience in doing sustainable practice in my design work has been because of the connections I made, not only while I was in university, but in the last 6 years, because there are only a handful of connections to make, which is, again, like in this conversation right now, I'm considering it as a good thing. This is because a lot of the costume design work I have to do, a lot of the set design work, the other people that are involved are people that I already have a relationship with, or that I know what they have in stock already because I've worked for that theater before, or XYZ. So I have it's not always that way, but in theory, there's a lot of good to say about how I run my practice, and then the practices that I've seen have coming out of having other emerging artists as friends doing theater. The biggest hiccup, I think, has been a shift into stage management. Stage management was never a career path I thought I was going to end up taking. And doing it, one of the first shows I ever did was a show where the playwright was in the room because we were still revising the script as they were rehearsing. And it was not a short script. It was a full two act, big thing. And after about the third draft, where I was reprinting the entire script, I thought, what the hell am I doing? What am I doing? We drive this theater that I was working at is 40 minutes outside of Saskatoon. So we were all driving to and from the theater, and I was printing hundreds of pages a day for these actors. And I looked at our director, and I looked at our playwright, and I looked at my cast, and I said, I'm not doing this anymore. This is insane. But it took me 3 days to because I was a new artist. I had never really stage managed before, and I didn't know how much power I had to say in the room. It took me 3 days before I was like even willing to question what we were doing. And that's a big hurdle that I think a lot of young and emerging artists have to do, is start to question why we keep doing the same things we keep doing. And not necessarily with printing, but on occasion with other things. And what we ended up doing for that show was I started, because I still, we didn't have the resources out in this town of 80. I still did print, but I would edit the pages in a way that I was only ever printing a page or two for any sort of edit. And then the next time we did a show like that, so that show went well, it was fine. And I continued to work out in that theater doing stage management in following years. And the next show that we did a few years later, that was another like co-pro, all the actors in the room were helping to write it. We're all doing it together. I said to the artistic director out there and the director of the show, what if we looked into different ways of doing this? And so what we did was we looked into getting refurbished iPads, acknowledging that paper cost, I'll call it cost, not meaning dollar, but what it costs us as a world, and electricity costs, they both exist, right? Mm-hmm. Switching to iPads does not make it, wow, we're so great. It just shifts where the cost goes, right? We're moving things over. But we thought, instead of printing hundreds of pages of scripts because we're rewriting it literally in the room, what if we got refurbished iPads and did it on a Google Docs instead, so we could all edit at the same time? So we tried it. And it, for that specific show, it worked really great. We had a younger cast that was very tech savvy, and we were really good at like making sure stuff was fully unplugged at the end of the day, fully like trying our best. And again, not to be perfect. That's the big kicker. We weren't trying to be perfect, but we were trying to be conscious about the actions we were taking. To put the other side on it, a few years later, again, we did a similar thing. We used the iPads that we got refurbished, and they were great, but we didn't have a tech savvy crew, so it didn't work for us, and we had to go back to paper scripts. So there's a lot of trial and error in this, and the big part of what I do is making sure that we're not trying to be perfect, and we'll never be perfect because there is no one solution. It's about exploring and making that conscious all the time, conscious effort to acknowledge the dollar store products and the electricity usage we're using, and how far I'm driving as the stage manager to the theater when all of the actors are carpooling, and I could carpool with them if they waited 10 minutes for me after the rehearsal, but they don't. So I drive myself, like things like that. There are conscious efforts that need to be taken throughout, whether or not we save a set or dumpster it. is it safe to save that set piece? I've worked with a lot of people who use a few too many staples in a staple gun, and that piece is no longer safe. So I don't know.
Yeah. Like there's the safety question too, because it like sort of like backing into that question too, there's when we're working with materials or so like working backwards to like where we get to like the design of a thing, the way that something is constructed, can we use that material again, and what are the design considerations that happen with that based off of time, human labor, like of how much time it takes something to put together. If you're not going to be stapling and gluing something together, which then you're going to treat disposably, are you using different products and things like that? And then does that get back to, well, what are the other places there? One of the things that surprised me when I had made the switch from architecture to theater was in architecture training, we were always trained, because we had to bring them into blueprints, we were trained around like the nominal sizes of things, like what are the units that things come in. And then when I started teaching theater, I was teaching a class around sustainability, and a conversation came up, and there was a set designer who was in the class who had designed, I want to say it was the sequel. It doesn't really matter what the show is, but like it had a giant window in it that was overhead, and they had designed it to be 23 feet across, like it was trapezoid, and it was like 23 across at the widest thing. And it was going to be made out of steel. Well, steel comes in 21-foot units. So that requires at least to purchase 2 of them, or 1 and a partial one. And when asked, like, well, could you make it 21 feet? They're like, oh, sure. Like knowing that information about what you're working with is useful. Like what are the units that I'm working with, and is it going to require like a full second piece of something to be able to work with it? And I really like I really want to emphasize the like the refurbished part of the iPads that you're working with, because like thinking about that idea of the costs that go into like the paper has like most of the time when we're interacting with a product, we're getting it like we're the least amount of impact for it. Like the manufacturing, there's like an embodied carbon, embodied energy. There's a few different terms for it. And one of the best things that we can do actually is just like keep something from going to waste. So like not buying new, but buying, like getting back to, I bring that play actually, Yvette, into classes so that we have this conversation, but like bringing back in, there's like so many things, and it gets into, not that it boils down to the trappings of capitalism, but like we're pushed to like, yes, it would be great to electrify most of our vehicles. However, it'd also be good just to like wait until we're done with the vehicles that we have, like because the actual use of them is actually not the biggest part of it. It's in the manufacturing, and then like, yes, electricity is great, but electrical storage requires lithium, and just like search lithium pools. It's upsetting, like the tar sands. It's kind of we live in a society, and so there are things that we can't escape if we're going to be doing things together. But like those questions of like, are there better ways to do that? That's something that I've noticed a lot in students. That's over the last decade or so, is that people are more like, I don't know if it's because of all the changes that we've been seeing collectively, this collective consciousness, but like thinking values wise and asking values-based questions in any process that you're coming into has become much more key, and there's a lot more willingness to do less if it aligns more with one's values. But none of our economic systems really incentivize that, so we work against it all the time.
Yeah, until they do, right?
Right.
Until it's like until we are forced into it. Like we're not taking the hint from Mother Nature, and so we are being actually forced into these things. So what's great is, for me, how some people have been preparing for it. right? Like been preparing for the inevitability of running out of fossil fuels, the inevitability of running out of wood, the inevitability of the pandemic and supply chain issues that, seemed to me perfectly, that was like, duh. But like,
Yeah.
I just, duh, when it happened, I was like, really? Where did you think you were getting your knockoff clothes or whatever? I don't want to drag us down because we were getting so
I
close
know.
to being positive. I do, Jensine, I'd like to ask you about, even as I was landing in Montreal, landing in Montreal, there's my guilt about flying around the country. But I did bundle these two jobs together so that I could, save on a flight. Even as I was landing, I was getting a note from Angus about the initiative that you're involved in with Angus and Carla. And I find it hilarious that it's almost like we've got generational stuff going on here, because Jensine was given stuff that Ian has written by Carla. And so that to me is hopeful, like that there is resource material. But maybe Jensine, you could talk about this initiative that's going on in Saskatchewan.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. So Angus Ferguson, who is the artistic director of that theater I was talking about with the iPads. The theater is called Dancing Sky Theater. It's out in Meacham, Saskatchewan. Angus, Carla Oros, who was my professor at the university and is now a good friend of mine, and I have been working on creating I don't know what the word. I don't know if we picked a word. A document, I guess, a living document that we keep on a Google Doc, and that we are endeavoring now in this coming week to bring it to other artistic directors of different theaters in town in Saskatoon and ask them to commit to / acknowledge the impact that they have at their theater regarding all of these sustainability questions. So Carla, Angus, and I had been talking for a very long time. There was a very large group of us, and then life happened, of course, and now it boiled down to just the three of us. And we've been talking about exactly what we've been talking about here. The conscious effort to look at lumber usage and power usage and people usage and all of the things that we need to be able to sustain in order to be sustainable. And sustainability is even a weird word in its own way. Sustainable to what end? But anyway, we've created a bunch of questions of various degrees that we have. I should have linked it. I could have linked it. That we are going to pitch on Monday to almost all artistic directors in Saskatoon, and ask them to commit to it. And we're hoping, the hope, I guess, is that we start to bring these conversations a little closer to home. It's great to do these panels, but I can't guarantee that the people I want to see this panel are going to watch it. So it's a way of one-on-one discussing these things with the people in my community in Saskatoon that have the advantage of making these changes. And then hopefully we can start to really bring our community together in various ways, whether that's creating a email group or something, so that, like I said, we can share costumes and share props and share set pieces, put a call out, and we have people that have committed to answering should something arise, that people are committed to being able to share resources, whether that's people or materials or space, in a way that we have taken for granted, I guess, in a way before, being a small community, and really bring sustainability to the forefront. We've been doing it before for a long time because of the community aspect of it. I don't think Beverly Kabelski, the head of wardrobe at the university, has been sharing costumes specifically for sustainability. I think she does it out of the goodness of her heart. But now, if we start to bring sustainability into that conversation, does that open up more people than just Bev to be the person to go to borrow things? And I don't know, I'm a little nervous to bring it to some of these people, because I feel like Yvette said, it's a generational thing. I feel like the child in the room, because Angus and Carla were both my mentors and people that brought me into this industry. So it's a bit nerve-wracking in that way, but it's exciting. It's exciting to be part of a group of people that I love and trust, to be able to talk about these things, because we are so good in Saskatoon specifically and across the world at doing things the way it's always been done. because the same people have been in charge forever. That's its own thing. Well, not necessarily, but with an asterisk. Everything I say with an asterisk.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I think the challenge in Saskatoon, you're right, Jensine, when you talk about scale, the size of us makes it easy to do a bunch of things and to sort of be multi-dis and move fluidly between roles in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
But there have been obstacles to sharing things. You know, the larger the theater, the less, the harder it's been to access anything from that theater. And speaking of being the child in the room, that has been part of the challenge, is like when we have, you know, when indie theaters have asked larger theaters to share, being treated like you're irresponsible and you know, and being condescended to, and like, you know, just there have been barriers to the thing that seems to me the thing that we should be doing, the thing that we say we do, which is collaboration. And Bev is a great example of like, Bev has supported the community out of that costume shop endlessly. There's no, you know, and we all know to return stuff clean or in better condition than it came out, right? Like, but that trust, that has not been extended for many years because there's been a territorialism about stuff. And it just feels like we have to all behave as if it's all like, it's pools, right? It's common good. It's the common pool of stuff.
Yeah, part of it, I think. Go ahead, Ian.
Oh, no. Say what you were going to say.
I was just going to confirm that part of Saskatoon specifically, too, is manpower. And the reason why a lot of it has been territorial or isn't shared is because some people just don't know. I think of Le Truc du Jour as the number one example. There's no one in wardrobe, so it's very difficult for wardrobe to be staffed in a way that people could borrow from it, right? And that's just the organization. There's nowhere for 25th where I work to be helpful because we don't have a storage space, period. We couldn't give you anything if we wanted to because we don't have anything. People is a big one, I think, for better or for worse. And like I said, the community thing is good and bad.
Yeah. And that for me, so we're back to capitalism and we're back to like money, right? Because the groups that have the resource of humans could be doing some of the work of, you know, shepherding Le Troup's costumes. Like it's all in all of our heads right now where everything is, like who's got what, right? Yeah. But it just feels like we're, you know, I think if we can break down those barriers a bit, it might be easier. Sorry, Ian, you were going to say something.
Oh, I mean, this is all actually connects and leads in, circles back around sort of where I was going to, which was around the like the compartmentalization also internally to a lot of our arts organizations. Like they've the efficiency that we look at when we're looking at like the way that we make things, like the physical materials that we look into and the way that it's how to straight materials also comes into the way that we organize. And like there's many theater, I think it's more the default way of operating where many of the artists who are making the art are not actually like those who are employed by the theater, like as employees, tend to be administrative, tend to be running like as a year round, and then the artists are sort of brought in as people to negotiate with to find the most efficient way to create the art. And in some ways it creates a situation sometimes where like the art is a byproduct of running an organization, like and this sort of like a reversal there, that's like the people that are there all the time are not necessarily the ones making the work, and that varies. And like again, there's an asterisk on everything, and it was interesting also, like I wanted to bring up a project on the subject of positive things, a project that PACT and the ADC, which so Professional Association of Canadian Theatres, who engages designers who are represented in collective bargaining, at least by the ADC. Like someone doesn't have to be an ADC member to there's no exclusivity there, but where there's collective contracts, especially with PAC theaters and others, they negotiate, but have like put in the grant is actually held by Theatre New Brunswick, but put in a grant to like essentially having this conversation where it's like, there are people who are engaged as artists who are coming into the theaters who are saying, well, I can't do these things that I want to do sustainably because I don't have this long-term engagement. I'm coming in for a project. And the barrier is administrative, or someone in production say we don't do it that way, or we don't do it that way, and you don't have agency to like change a system that you're actually not a part of. Whereas also from the other side, we'd hear from either administration or technical staff or artistic staff that it's like, well, the artists that we're engaging aren't interested in working that way, and because they're contractors, we can't force them to do that. So there's a project that's starting called Old Dogs on the subject of what brought it to mind was this idea that it's like, this is always the way that we've done it, but its shorthand is Old Dogs, as in trying to find new tricks around sustainable ways of collaborating between engagers and the engaged in terms of those ways to try and like break those down. By like right now, it's a small pilot of engaging with 10 PACT affiliated theaters and a designer to come up with whether or not that's like, are they writers, are there different ways of working with materials, there's a timeline, and trying to resource like because it boils down to like the capital to be able to spend that time or find those resources together. If we can offset some of that, can we find new ways of working? And I think that that's sort of like what we need to be making the room for, is like getting back to forming those relationships of collaboration, because a lot of our systems of how we make work are like working against that in a lot of different ways in the name of efficiency and smaller budgets and limited resources.
I just
Jensine,
watched.
You had a very excited.
Yeah, she had I saw a bunch of light bulbs going off over Jensine's head.
You just reminded me of something, and actually I was hoping to talk about it later, but that was the perfect segue for it, of this spirit of collaboration between designers. That's what it sparked in my head. So a few years ago, Yvette will remember this, we did a show called The Penelope Ad. And it was one of the first, and might be the biggest build I've ever done on a show ever. And the designer, Carla, again, one of my past professors and good friends, and I talked pretty early in the design process. We actually, like, outside of, I don't know, this was back in 2019. And this was pre-pandemic. This was another something I want to talk about is like getting people in the room. So put a pin in that one for later. But this was pre all of that. And Carla and I decided to kind of design together. Not in a like, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. Hooray. We're going to go to Yvette and tell her that this is what's happening. But that I knew I needed to buy fabric for my dresses, and Carla needed to buy fabric for her set. And instead of Carla going to buy fabric for her set, she used the scraps from the fabric that I did of my dresses. And I will never, ever, ever forget the moment we were on deck. It might have been the first or second day, set was installed, and all of the actors walked out in their dresses, and it was like magic because it just worked. It was so perfect having the same fabric in the set, on the dresses, on the floor. It just was magical. And there was, like, we bought a lot of fabric for that show because we built everything from scratch, which I'm not proud of, but it worked really well. But being able to say that we saved so much more too, not only dollars, but in like fabric costs, because we were willing to collaborate as designers and talk about it ahead of time and work through that. We did the same thing with Art of War. The set designer for the Art of War and I still have bags of fabric from the Art of War because I was a little scrap goblin and took all of the scraps from the set designer and hand stitched them onto the costumes so they really fit in the world that we were setting, which worked great for both of those shows. So they're kind of unique experiences, but being able to collaborate not only as a community, but from show to show as the people in the room ahead of time is great. There have been times where that doesn't work. There have been times that I've worked in where we say we're going to and we don't because life happens, and that's just how it goes. But in those unique moments where everything sits right and you get to talk to each other out, not necessarily with the director either too, just as designers in the room, man, that has made such a world of difference. Oh, I got so excited when you brought that up. It's like,
well, I think that design is I actually think that design is inherently sustainable because it's about essential things. And the things that get in the way of that are limitations that force it into less efficient, at least ideas as well of putting things together. And I want to also make the difference because we talked about limitations and limitations or ways that contain design and they cause you to make choices. I think it's important to differentiate between parameters and limitations. So parameters, we're going to work in this theater. I know that from the beginning that I have to work within this space. I'm going to design something for that space. When we start to talk about if we don't have the time to go back and forth, we're saying and we have to do it within a week, that becomes a limitation. And so we start to look at how do we are those limitations working for us or against us? And I think about it as doing a lot of lighting design. One of the shorthands within doing lighting for theater is that is working in systems. So you have your front light system, you have your side light system, there's shorthands of doing that. And then so you'll have you have this sort of initial approach that's as opposed to you could spend a very long time picking each individual light for each individual thing, or just layering one scene over another and picking the few lights that you want in that. But oftentimes we're saying okay, here's my front light system. And now I've created, because of the limitation where I haven't essentialized it to what the actual idea is, I've created something within a system that will allow me to get there as fast as possible and as close as possible, that I've created an opportunity for waste. Because I'm using 10 lights to do something that probably I would have done 2 lights with. And as I go through the tech process, I'm turning them all on and I'm bringing things down versus saying these are the things that I want. And this is what the idea is. And if, we might, I'm not saying that there's an ideal world as a designer that we're going to get there, but that we will get to an essential idea as much as possible as a designer, especially given time.
Which kind of throws us back to Jensine's talking about people in the room. Mm-hmm. It's not just the people in the room, it's actually the length of time when you know who your people in the room are going to be. And it's always going to come back to the systems and the capitalist system that oversees us all. Jensine, that's the thing you wanted to put a pin in. So here's the pin. Hold the pin.
I do want to show you my dog first because he said it. He was whining to be let up, and so I let him up and thought, well, I have to show him now. So here's Nash. Nash says hi.
Hi. And your little dog too.
And my little dog. He'd be a great Toto. The systems of having people in the room. So something that I've started doing in my design work, which I find exceptionally effective now that we live kind of in a Zoom world for most of the time, is when I start working on a show, the very first thing I do is start a Google Drive. And I know that opens a whole other egg about Google and the sustainability and equitability and all those words of Google. I'm not going to get into that, but I'm talking about people and sharing. And the very first thing I do is start a Google Drive. And I typically create a Drive folder for sound, lighting, set, props, and costumes and stage management, just in case they want to have a folder. And I share it with stage management, and I share it with the other designers and the director, of course, too. And I try my very best to keep all of my inspiration pictures, all of my sketches, all of my final drawings, all in that Google Drive, so that at any given time, the other designers can have access to that and we can start to collaborate. And while not always has it been useful, on one of the more recent shows I've done, it was very, very useful. It was nice to be able to see what the set design was thinking, because if I wouldn't have known what color she was thinking for the set, if I wouldn't have talked to her, seen in the Google Drive, and then confirmed with her, my poor actors would have looked just awful in the colors I picked for them to wear. And it started, I mean, this was one of those things where the conversation didn't really work out. We had started workshopping the show months before. We sat in a Zoom call and read it and then talked about it for a long time. And then we did that again, like a few days later, workshopping. But we workshopped this show with the idea that for the next 2 months before we even start rehearsals, we could be in conversation with each other and start the design process and start to talk to each other and make sure it was really cohesive. But it was over Christmas time, and it was, then over New Year's, and then we were suddenly starting rehearsal, and all of us went, oh my gosh, we haven't even said anything to each other. So these things only go so far, of course, always. But having that shared, although digital, having that shared space, I've found has been really, really effective in getting people kind of on the same page when there's not a lot of time to meet, or they're not in the same location to meet. I've worked on a couple of shows where the sound designer's been in different locations, so they just send their files in and then we can all have access to them whenever we need. That has been really, really, really handy. And like I said, everything with an asterisk, it comes with its own cost, of course. Then you need tech, then you need a Google account, and you need, accessibility barriers and technology barriers and financial barriers to all of that sort of stuff. So keep that with a grain of salt, but having a shared space to whatever degree, especially for people that maybe don't have a theater venue, a house to work at. I always think of Persephone. They're the big one in Saskatoon. They've got a house. They are the theater house. They have a wardrobe and a prop shop and XYZ. I do not have those things. So when I get hired there, that becomes the home. But not everyone's in the building at the same time, and yada yada yada, XYZ. One of the greatest things in this collaboration station, I'll call it, that I've noticed is doing stuff that includes the actors as well ahead of time. Because when you were talking about, I forget how you phrased it, Ian, but it made me laugh. I was going to say that, oftentimes it's not the script and the pre-work that is the bad. It's getting those dang actors in the room, and then they start wanting stuff, and the directors start wanting stuff. It's about the necessities, right? We as designers deal with the necessities of what we read in the script and what we talk about. And it's when we get people in the room that they want stuff, which is fine. But having one of the shows that I did at the beginning of my career, we had been in rehearsal for a few days, and then I did fittings. And what I did for fittings, and I understand again that this is a totally unique thing that will probably never happen again, but we went to campus, we went to go see Bev, and I went 1 hour before the actors were going to arrive, four female actors at the time. And I went into Bev, and I had all their measurements, and I pulled 8 shirts and 7 skirts and whatever. And I organized them kind of by that could work for this character and that could work for this character, because that was the design. They were all same, but different style, same time period, same everything. And they showed up, and we had a mass communal fitting. And I didn't buy a single thing for that show except for 1 pair of socks, because everything else, we did it together and we tried stuff on, and an actress would put something on and go, that doesn't fit me, you try it. And it became this beautiful moment where then they all felt happy in it. And then they all didn't ask me for anything else, because they were included in the design process in a way that they had never been included before, mostly because the design wasn't done ahead of time, but also because it just worked out that way. Including, and whether it's a Zoom workshop or not, but I find including the actors and including the director and including other staff at the theater, if they're available in these preliminary discussions, will bring out the wants a lot faster. And then we deal with less making stuff and it getting cut, making stuff and it getting cut, making stuff and it gets cut. And then you have so much waste, especially if you're making it all. So if that's a Google Drive, if that's actually just talking to people, if that's, you have the luxury of paying people to do a workshop months in advance, Talking to people, I think, solves a lot of problems, which is why maybe on Monday, when I talk to all the people with my fancy list of questions, maybe that will start dialogue like this. Maybe there'll be more conversations like this that we're doing right now. I don't know. Mic drop. There you go.
That there's something that because a lot of the work that I've done in the last few years has crossed over into the tech sector. Like we're doing it outside of theaters, or we're doing technical development and things. And one of the things that, like, one of the big differences in the culture, that there's big creator cultures and there's all sorts of issues on both sides of things. That reminded me of is like, if we're developing, and we won't commit to the release of something, that app or otherwise piece of software, until it works. And which, when you're working with theater collaborators, it's like, but I want to put it into this festival. It's like, I can't guarantee until it works that it's going to work. And that gets into that limitation parameters question. Like, if we create that limitation, we don't know if the show works. And I would say that we could say that a show that is like constantly cutting things, or is wasteful in the way that it's using, or there's things that haven't been, and by essential I don't mean like we have to like pare everything down, but that hasn't been thought of in a thoughtful way, and everything considered is like isn't working. And so, but we, say we're going to open it on this day, so too bad. Like, we're going to put what's out there that's there. And those are luxuries too. Like, we're talking about things that, if we're talking about in our, not to, like, we can't get outside of capitalism, so here we are. But like, in those things, that there are those limits, that it's like it costs money to do things. It's hard to like go against the systems. I designed a show years ago. It feels more recent, but we like had this, we wanted all the energy to be created through renewables. At first there was like, well, we can't get people to create all of it on bikes because we don't know how many people show. That was the original idea. And then so we moved to solar, because it's like, well, the sun continues to shine. And even here we are in Southern Ontario, and we were doing this in late February, early March. Set up a solar system. And then, like, with the venue, this was at Harbourfront. It's a union house. Stagehands work in the theater. Solar doesn't go in the theater. So how do you get the power from outside to inside? You're talking about now working between two different labor unions, like trying to do something, and with one side being like, there's a perfectly good theater here. Why are you not using it? Why have you decided not to use the outlets that we've provided for you? Are these plugs not good enough for you? And moving batteries in and out so they could charge outside, so that we could like do that. And
oh my God,
figuring those things out takes time and are complicated and do not work within our typical systems of creation.
They don't.
And those batteries are heavy.
But they're getting smaller.
Good,
yes.
good.
They're in carts.
But it is about preparedness, right? Like, it is like we are trying these things. I mean, you were doing that like years ago, Ian, and now we're at the point where it's actually being asked for and required. Right. And, we're ready. It's not like we're starting from zero at this point. You guys, before we wrap, there's a couple of things I want. So is there a website? Like, Ian, you talk about the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts.
Yes.
You guys have a website that we can share with people?
We do. It's sustainablepractice.org is our website. I'll plug another couple of them. And you mentioned before the Climate Change Theater Action, climatechangetheateraction.com. I think if you go to .org, it will redirect you there as well. It's not that exciting right now because we're in between commissions. We're commissioning the 2023 festival right now. CG Tools Canada. There's a couple of different ways to get there, but cgtoolscanada.org or .com or cgtools.ca now, I think, also works, which will bring you to the Creative Green tools that I mentioned as well. I also plug, they don't necessarily have a website, but the Canadian Green Alliance has a really great guide that they've worked with a lot of community members in putting together around sustainable production. That's really useful as well. And we try and link as much of that. If you go to sustainablepractice.org, all of that is like, there's a tools and research page that we try and keep all those things linked to as well. So if you remember one thing, sustainablepractice.org.
That's great. Jensine, any resources you would recommend? Oh, look, I've got screen sharing. So I'm just going to go ahead and share a picture of the Penelopiad if I can.
Yay.
Are you guys seeing it?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You're seeing the Penelopiad. Oh, good.
Mhm.
Which is the design where Carla and Jensine worked together on with the same fabric. And yeah, it was completely integrated.
Mhm. Absolutely the crown jewel of my career so far.
Anything else, other shares?
The only links I could share right now is that where we got our refurbished iPads, there's a program for nonprofits. It doesn't function the same as it used to, but it's called Tech Soup.
Mm-hmm.
Tech, as in technology soup. That's where we got for Dancing Sky. We got our iPads from Tech Soup, I think. I don't remember now that I say that out loud. But I did buy 7 refurbished iPads for the Saskatoon Fringe Festival last year, just off of Best Buy's refurbished program. Best Buy has a marketplace for refurbished iPads that opens a whole other thing too. It's Best Buy. I can't guarantee where they came from, but I know they are refurbished and they work like a dream. So that's a really good place.
A place to. I feel like they will ship to Canada out there. Like, if you're looking for refurbished technology, there's a company called Back Market that works with refurbished vendors and provides warranties to equipment. So it's nice and clean. So it's not just buying something off a Facebook Marketplace that you hope somebody hasn't earned. They go and it's well refurbished, and they have a large variety of things. So if you're as somebody who works a lot in video design, oftentimes I am frustrated with my computing resources and end up putting a lot of money into it. But if you just need daily drivers for phones, computers, etc., refurbished, there's so many things out there. People get rid of them so frequently, and that's a huge
issue.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask you for one hopeful, I know it's hard, a hopeful thing before we wrap, so we're not leaving people in the dumps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know what I want to talk about. So think about
it.
So it's a project that I've been excited about recently. We're going to make it happen regardless of whether or not anybody gives us money to it, because there's, aside from the fact that we want to pay people to think about ambitious things, it could be done just by the time. So I was having the origins of this. I was having the thought the other day, when billionaires kept going into space, there's this narrative, there's this trope of wealthy people are going to go to space because the Earth is going to get trashed, and then there's many movies about this of someone comes back and it's Wall-E is about this essentially. And I was like, what happens if actually the billionaires left? Because I did a couple of projects about space, and the main thing I took away is it's really inhospitable, and this planet is really hospitable. We've evolved that way. And so what happens if all the billionaires leave and things just get better? Because they're we've taken the top, we've cut the head off the snake. I don't know, I'm mixing metaphors, I think. Anyway, it led to this idea of wanting to think in utopian ways, and pluralize. Utopias are problematic too. The original utopia is based off of slave labor, so knowing that they're problematic and everybody's going to define it differently. But so when working with trying to recruit artists into developing courses, everything is in course in that, but open source courses in the Department of Utopian Studies, which is all about individuals, guides, reading lists writ large, not all written material, but essentially coming together with a syllabus for somebody's utopia and how to package those together to how do we imagine the other side of the climate crisis, because that's if we just like spend all of our time wallowing in how bad things can get, it's depressing. And so if we can imagine the future and futurisms, that we might be able to get excited about those. So that's what I'm excited about right now, and hopefully we'll get more stuff sharing. We're working on some papers right now. There's some funding applications in to pay artists to develop these performance things that we will call classes in the Department of Utopian Studies.
So cool. Thanks. Jensine.
My thing of hope. My thing of hope is having conversations like these with people that, I was going to say agree, but I don't know if you guys agree. So I'm going to agree again with an asterisk, that we can agree on, and that there are generations in the room. That makes me feel hopeful. I'm hopeful that Yvette has influence with their peers, and Ian has influence with their peers, and I have influence with my peers, and we can start these conversations elsewhere. And I'm hopeful in looking at how far we've already come, and in the spaces that I'm working in, I'm hopeful that we, when we started the iPad thing at Dancing Sky, that was 2017 or something like that. Like, I'm hopeful that since 2017 to now 2022, in the last 5 years, that whole theater has rebuilt using the scraps from other theaters. That gives me hope. I was annoyed at first that we kept giving the scraps, but you know what? Now I'm seeing things in a different way, and I'm hopeful that starting these conversations at these levels is going to allow for more people to start to acknowledge how far they already are in their practice, how far they already are. We are so far in Saskatoon. We already share props and costumes and set and stuff, but we are so far. We're like, I don't know, if there's a scale, we're both so close and yet so far. But I want people to feel hope in themselves too, in how far you are in your personal life. I'm sure you recycle. I'm sure you consider biking to work. I'm sure you consider doing a lot of things. It's just about that consciousness. And I'm hopeful that people will start to become more conscious and understand that they don't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to work the first time. It rarely does. And that they continue. One of the best pieces of advice, I'm going to pause. One of the best pieces of advice I was ever given doing theater was that theater people are kind of hopeless romantics. We have to be able to let ourselves get our hearts broken. A show closes, you loved it. You get away from a cast that you loved. We have to be okay with getting our hearts broken and coming back again and again and again. That we keep, that people like us and that our peers that start to see things a little differently keep coming back and going, well, what if now we do this? And then next time you do something else, or maybe that didn't work and you try something different. I have hope for the post-pandemic revitalization of theater, that we can start to go in avenues that maybe we thought before were too expensive or too unreasonable or XYZ. I'm hopeful that, don't take this the wrong way, Yvette. I'm hopeful that our folks in Saskatoon that have been in charge for a long time, I'm hopeful that I'm seeing them starting to retire. Not that I want you to retire, that's not what I mean, but I'm hopeful that the folks in town that we know need to retire are starting to retire, and that there is hope that there are new folks being in charge, and that there are new practices being explored. And that hopefully we can start to see change in a people basis too, that we can start to rotate people out and get new ideas and fresh takes, and we stop doing things the way they've been always done. I'm full of hope. I'm a big chaos goblin. I love talking about like things I'm excited about. I'm excited. And the last thing that I'm going to mic drop again, I mentioned that I bought only a pair of socks for that show that we did the communal fitting. I have those socks and I still wear them. So
are you wearing them right now?
No, I'm not.
Oh, that would have worked out perfectly.
Whatever. They're compression socks, so they're a bit weird.
Oh.
Well, you guys, thanks so much for this time, for this discussion, for, for your thoughts, for the resources that we will be able to share outwards. I too, Jensine, am hopeful for all of those things. Yeah, and I'm rarely hopeful. I'm an apocalyptist. I'm rarely hopeful. So this has turned out to be a hopeful conversation for me, or at least enough hope to, keep moving forward. We must go on. Look, there is Donna Michelle. Hop back in to usher us out.
Hey, I didn't mean to cut you off at all.
You did not.
Y'all, I had to say that I really enjoyed your conversation, although I'd like to put an asterisk on that. Thank you all for big ideas, for practical resources. I'm definitely, something I'm taking away from this is the idea. Ian talked about the end user experiencing the least impact. And so I'm thinking about the other end. And Yvette, of course, this makes me think about throwing a stone and not being able to see where it lands, and the untold impact, because I live in this play now until it's off my chest. So thanks to all of you for that just very fruitful space of thinking. We will get links of all the drops out to folks on various social medias, and we really appreciate you. Oh, before we go, the next sessions in the Community Justice Forum are on Wednesday, July the 20th at 3 p.m. We're going to be talking to Ebony Gooden about the process of translating a script from English to ASL, and about deaf authored work as well, as a different practice. And at 7 p.m., Yvette and I are going to be talking to Nikki Shafula in a session called What Comes After, which is sort of where we are, Yvette. Like we're kind of in, or maybe we're perpetually in and after. So it does well to think what we ought to do to get into the magical future that was dreamed up here today and somewhere every day. Thank you all so much for your time and your thoughts. Thank you, Marcia.
Yes, thank you.
So good to see you all. Have a good night and see y'all again on July 20th, same bat channel.
Thanks, DM. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.